Welcome to the Success Revenue Podcast, the only podcast in the Middle East that brings you leaders in customer success, account management, sales, and go to market to share ideas, perspectives, and valuable learnings on how to successfully drive revenue, delight customers, and take it to the next level.
We are hosts. I'm Haidar Al-Sad, CEO of RevSetter, the modern customer platform. And with me, I have my amazing co-host, Ivy Ferrero, CS executive, advisor, and influencer. And we're excited to bring you a long list of amazing guests on this season of the Success Revenue podcast. And today we have a real treat for you from the Americas and from Canada, a CS leader and influencer that will speak about many different topics. We'll touch on, amongst other things, the impact of AI on customer success and the development of customer success. We'll speak about how leaders can own their identity in CS and impact when it comes to the organization. And we'll also get many specific and very tangible pieces of advice to think about throughout your career journey in customer success and go-to-market. And so very excited for today's conversation, Ivy. Like I said, we have a real CS veteran and executive and influencer with us today, with Andrea, that's going to talk through a lot of different cool topics.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I definitely follow her on LinkedIn. And yeah, I think it's just so interesting that so many also CS leaders are now doing their own thing and doing fractional work. Like it's actually has become more popular now that I see this on LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so as well. I think there's more and more organizations that need someone to come in and advise and help out and kind of course correct what they're doing and get them on the right track and then kind of stabilize, and then they can continue building internally. I know, for example, I'm advising a company right now that's doing really well. It's a growth stage company, one of the bigger ones in the region. But they're trying to figure out, like, how do we drive our comp models across the go-to-market function? How do we think about our CS organization, structure, metrics, and these things? And they have amazing CS leaders in place and people, but they kind of just need that external perspective and kind of mind around how to course correct. So I definitely think there's a lot of need for that in the market right now. And I'm sure we'll see more of it as well in the future.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it makes sense. It removes the risk for companies also of, investing so much money into a CS leader, bringing them in. I think it's soft. It's a soft way of getting your fit into understanding how can customer success work for your company. You're in Spain right now.
I'm in Spain right now, traveling around. It's been good. The summertime, it's a lot of travel and work. But yeah, we'll be back in Dubai in a couple of weeks, and then I go off to Saudi right away for some work, and then back into the normal groove of things, flying back and forth every other week to different location usually. But it's been good. It's been a good summer so far, and hopefully I'll get a few days off here with the family next week. We'll see if that actually happens, but that's the plan at least. And how about you?
Yeah, I mean, this is my second summer in Dubai, and honestly, it's not as hot as last summer. It's actually it's been really nice. But I think this next month, what I'm really looking forward to is the guests that we're gonna have on the podcast. I feel like they're amazing. A lot of them are is in Saudi, Abu Dhabi as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to. I feel like it's part 2 of our podcast, and yeah, I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. For you listeners, there's a really nice list of guests coming up here in the next month or two. That'll be exciting, and I'm excited as well. And we have a couple, like I said, Saudi, UAE, obviously. We have a couple of really international voices in the AI space and beyond. So I think it's going to be some really interesting conversations, and yeah, looking forward to learning a lot during those. So what do you say, Ivy? Should we bring in today's guest and get this conversation started?
Yes. Yeah, let's do it. This is our first Canada guest, I think.
Yeah, so exciting. She's great. So I think it'll be an amazing conversation. Let's get it going.
Okay.
All right, everyone. We're so excited for today's guest. Andrea, welcome to the Success Writer podcast. And we're really bringing a treat for everyone today, someone that is a top voice, I would say, an influencer in customer success and in the space with a long experience across organizations in Canada, in the US, and beyond. And Andrea is someone that brings experience from multiple leadership levels in customer success across organizations. And what's really, really exciting about that as well is that today she is running her own consultancy and business with CS Impact and get to work with multiple different organizations to really help them turn customer success into the revenue engine and see all the challenges and opportunities that comes with that. So very excited to bring you on today, Andrea, coming from Toronto, Canada today, where you're based, and joining us for the podcast. Welcome. We're so excited to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure.
I've been looking forward to this all week.
Me too. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm anxious to dive in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Andrea, let's maybe start here just to kind of keep it simple for our audience and listeners here that don't know you. We have listeners from all around the Middle East and the US and some global audiences as well. So why don't you just give us your background to start? Tell us about kind of your journey on a high level to where you are today, and then we'll kind of take that and go into the conversation.
Sure. Yeah. So, again, thank you for having me. In terms of my background, I mean, I love big, meaty challenges and am known as a transformational leader, meaning I love getting into companies, transforming their customer success and post sales organization. I'd say where that really got started for me was at Procore. So prior to Procore, I was in marketing and then in sales, but Procore hired me to found their customer success team in Canada during a time of hyper growth. They were going internationally. And so I stood up their customer success organization here and grew that team from 4 to 35 people across 5 functions in 3 years. And we went from $2 million in revenue in region to $30 million. And as a company, we went from 65 to 550 million in a successful IPO. So that's where I really cut my teeth on customer success and what world class sort of SaaS companies look like. And then from there, I really wanted to take that experience to smaller organizations. So I became the vice president of customer success at Revenue.io, which is a go to market B2B SaaS company. And then Kindsight, which is in the fundraising intelligence space. I basically rebuilt both of their customer success teams from the ground up. So I love big beanie challenges. I recently launched my own business. And how that came about was I was actually looking for my next vice president of customer success role. And after talking to over 30 companies, I realized two things. One, companies are really risk adverse right now. They don't want to hire a senior leader unless they check all the boxes. They know that they are the right person. And so companies are very hesitant to hire senior leaders right now. And then two, I learned that I also was sort of a bit risk adverse and was thinking, wow, like all these companies I talked to had some really big meaty challenges in them. And I thought, man, this is probably going to be a short engagement, maybe, 1 to 2 years max. You're going to get me into the role, ask the world of me, ask me to solve your problem. If I can't solve it, you might fire me. And so I started to think about all these companies and the engagements as short term. And that's where the fractional business came in, where um, I was more than happy to engage with these companies fractionally and work with a number of different companies on their really big, sort of meaty go to market challenges.
Wow, that's incredible, Andra. And this whole thing about fractional, I have heard more and more about it now, how like the many benefits about it. And I feel like there's a lot of leaders that are stepping into this fractional work. Is there anything like from because you went from working in different sizes of organizations. Now that you work with yourself, have you noticed that anything has changed, or is there anything that you like more about the fractional side of things?
It's really interesting. I mean, I think earlier in my career, it was great experience to work for organizations. I mean, I started as an individual contributor. I started in marketing. I was an account executive. I worked my way into, management, um, manager of customer success teams, director, then vice president. So I wouldn't change anything about that experience. But I do find that for sort of where I'm at in my career, as well as where the market is right now, going fractional is definitely the right decision for me. I love working with a number of different companies on their challenges and not just a single company. I love getting sort of deep and wide in the organization, but offering that outside perspective as well. So it's definitely the right decision for me. But I wouldn't be the fractional leader I am today if I didn't have that operational experience as a full time employee.
Mm, yeah, 100%, 100%. Um, and Adele, I wanted to take your perspective because obviously over a lot of many years we have heard about like what is happening to customer success, and I kind of wanted to take your take on this. What do you think is customer success would look like in the next years? Where do you think we're heading towards to?
This is a great question. In fact, I get asked this question a lot. And I really do feel like customer success is going through a bit of an identity crisis right now with sort of, AI, the shift towards more commercialization and driving revenue. We've forgotten who we are. And we don't know who we are anymore. We used to be, the drivers of adoption, the keepers of retention, right? And now we're being asked to drive revenue, which is great. We should always drive revenue. But then with AI and sort of the uncertainty, macro, political, economic climates, we don't know who we are anymore. And so I feel like very much in customer success, we're sort of waiting to be told who we are. Right? We're waiting to be told what role we play in sort of go to market in this new climate, in this new sort of AI space, in this new revenue sort of driving profitability, sustainable, durable growth phase that we're in. We are waiting for someone to tell us who we are. And what I keep telling leaders is we know who we are. We are the keepers of the revenue of the company. We are the drivers of that revenue through expansion. We know who we are. And so I think, rather than waiting to be told who we are, we really need to stand up and say, no, we know who we are and we're willing to pivot and shift with whatever direction we're going here. But it's, I really do feel like customer success is just kind of we're waiting to be told, whereas I don't see that on the sales side. There's a lot this sales teams are going through the same shifts. They're in the same macroeconomic political environment. um, right? They're just a different team in the same company. They're facing the same things with AI and questions around that. And yet they're not going through an identity crisis, not that I've seen, right? But CS, we are. And I don't think it makes any sense. I think that, we know who we are. We're just not loud enough. We don't know how to tie that to metrics. We don't know how to tie that to what the board cares about. And that's the gap, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you, Andrea. I think before I used to, yes, be all about retention and adoption and advocacy and everything. But I feel like now I feel like customer success leaders, we have this pressure that we have to drive revenue. So we're all about the revenue now. But I think it's because it's personally for me, it makes me feel like maybe my job is a little bit more secure if I own revenue instead of just being an admin support, which is what they believe that customer success is. But I love your take. I believe, yes, we're going through an identity crisis. And even for Hader and I here in the Middle East, we have to educate what customer success is because it still feels like they are like 5 years trying to catch up to
Mm.
what the West already knows of what customer success is. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
totally agree.
absolutely. I know. I always say you should always tie yourself to the money in your role. If you tie
Yes.
yourself to the money, you're indispensable, right? When the CFO looks at the budget, when he's looking at sort of the balance sheet and where to cut costs, where to save money, et cetera, like you need to be tied to the money. And that's the same as if you're in marketing, sales, customer success, like tie yourself to the money.
Yeah, I love that.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because I think at the end what you were saying there earlier, Andrea, tying yourself to money, but also the metrics that matter to the CEO, to the CFO, to the board, to the business is extremely critical. And for someone that, now is running a company and been in those positions a long time, but also been in the CS space for 15, 20 years before it was called CS back then, I think it's always been a case where CS has maybe felt that they are taking a back seat to sales or new business. It's emerging and we're kind of learning as we're going, versus I think the best CS leaders, and like you pointed out, are the ones that know exactly what their purpose is, how they can impact the business, and how they can communicate that within the organization and beyond. And that's where you get CS leaders that actually are part of the executive team and the board meetings and the decision making, versus CS leaders that are maybe falling behind and kind of not getting into the room where the actual decisions are made. And I'm curious, kind of for yourself, right? Like you've been, as you said, on the operating side, and now you're consulting and seeing many organizations. Kind of, what is the biggest learning when it comes to that? The CS leader that's actually getting a seat at the table versus the one that's not. Obviously, it's tied to metrics and revenue, these things. But what are you seeing? What are some learnings in terms of how you can do that and how you can adjust your approach as a CS leader or as an organization to better fit into that position?
Yeah. I mean, I think it all comes down to business acumen. And what's really interesting, so I've been taking some courses through Pavilion recently, and I've heard it said more than once, and I agree with it, that sales teams have they have a natural business acumen. They understand sort of like the pipeline that they're bringing in, the conversion rates, the revenue that it drives, the close rates, how it ties into the bottom line, and basically the balance sheet for the company, right? Like it all ties together. But I've heard it say, and I do agree that like customer success, we don't have that same sort of flow. We can't seem to tie everything that we're doing to dollars and cents, and to really understand how that impacts the revenue of the company, and the expenses of the company as well, right? I think of profitability, and there's the growth, but then there's your
Yeah,
EBITDA, right? And so
right. Yeah,
we 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 don't seem to tie that as closely together. We don't seem to have that same level of, I don't know, dollars first, business acumen. And so what I see is the leaders that are setting themselves apart in customer success are getting that business acumen. And that was a gap for me. Right? Like nobody taught me sort of the core metrics of the business and what the
right.
board cares about and how to read an income balance sheet and even what EBITDA means and the calculations. Like nobody teaches you that stuff. And yet to elevate yourself as a leader, those are the things that you need to know so that you understand the role and the position you're in the organization and how that directly translates to things that the board cares about. So this is where I love courses like revenue architecture, the courses that Pavilion runs. Um, right? That you can elevate your learning in that regard. But then you also have to take a lot of onus on yourself, to dig in and understand it. Like I just learned this magic rule of 40,
I was just
which
about to say
like
the rule of 40. Yeah.
the rule of 40, I learned that like recently. Like that shouldn't be the case as like a VP, but that's one that I learned recently. Net magic number, right? I learned that one recently, and that's almost embarrassing for me to say as a leader, right? But it's
I
this,
don't even know what you're talking about, Andrea.
right? Like it's
No,
just,
it's
but this is
yeah.
like the core, what are the core metrics that like the board and investors are looking at and how they measure the company, and how does that translate to your function? That's like it's a major gap, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and so, yeah,
Absolutely.
I had to learn these things myself. Um, but there's a lot of onus on the
Yeah,
leader to make those
100%.
connections.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's actually it's very funny. I laughed when you said, 'cause I was just actually gonna say when you were done, just use the example of the Rule of 40 because I always ask that when I come in and consult or advise different companies. I ask the CSO, okay, tell me about the Rule of 40, what it is, how do you impact it? 99% don't know. Wait, Rule of 40, I've heard it, maybe seen it somewhere. Yeah, then I've kind of tried to make up what it is, but they don't know. And it's one of the most important numbers that your board will look at or the VC or the investors will look at. And most of the people in CS don't know. But the truth is it's CS impacts that number maybe more than anything else because it's really made up of two things. It's cost on one side and cost margin. And on the other side is really ARR growth, which is impacted by NRR and new business sales. And a huge part of that is the NRR that you're driving in CS. But as CS leaders, we don't know these things fully or understand them. Because if we do, then it's much easier to make the business case of, hey, we need this budget, we need to allocate resources here, and this is how that will impact NRR, which impact growth, which impacts Rule of 40 and the business in this way, which is a very kind of straight line reasoning that works for the CFO and the CEO and the board. So I think that's great that you brought that up because it's again one of the very tangible examples that you can just ask any VP of CS and ask them to explain it, and right away you'll know if they understand how they're really impacting the business or not. But tell me more about that last piece also that you said, Andrea. I'm kind of curious. The onus is on the leader, right? And we've all been, through that process in our careers where the higher up you come, the less support you get. Like when you're new into the business, you get a lot of training. You maybe get become a manager, you get a lot of training. As soon as you start hitting director, VP, CCO, like the higher up you get, it's kind of more like assume that you know what you're doing, but it's a new role, it's a new world, it's a new kind of set of responsibilities. How do you advise companies or when you come in, how do you kind of attack those pieces where the leader really is not getting a lot of support and training are kind of more so thrown into the fire and say, hey, figure this out, which we a lot of times do, but not as easy without the support, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I love how you said, the higher you move in an organization, the less support you get. It's so true, right? Like think of the onboarding, right? For like a BDR or a new
Yeah.
CSM or like how long they're in onboarding versus a senior executive that might be in onboarding for like 1 to 2 days. And then it's like, okay, here's the problem, right?
Yes.
Like,
Go
here's
solve it.
what we
Yeah.
need you to solve. And, right. And the interview for those roles is all about here's the problem. What's your approach? Right? How are you going to help us solve this? In fact, I started going to interviews when I was looking for my next full time role. And I was just like, look, just tell me your problem and I'll tell you if I can help you. Right. And that's kind of how I approach my fractional leadership as well, where it's just like, forget the pitch deck, forget all the fluff. Like, just tell me the problem that you have. And I'll tell you if I have the right level of expertise. So, to go back to your sort of question here, um, Hadar, I think, there is a lot of onus on the leader. But there is more support now than I would say there ever was in the past. So, in the
Great.
past, especially on the customer success side, it's been pretty minimal in terms of building that business acumen, having a community. Like it's really in the past couple years I'd say that like I think of, and I don't know if your audience is familiar with Pavilion, but like you can take CCO school and CRO school and CMO school, and I took the revenue architecture course with Winning by Design. Like those were all really great level sets for me. In fact, when I got into the revenue architecture course by Winning by Design, I had all these aha moments like, wow, that explains why that failed. That explains why we went through a layoff. That explains why we struggle with this. Like it just explained so much. And I kept thinking, oh, I wish I had have had this course earlier. I wish I had have known this sooner. But the reality is I don't think it existed earlier in my career. I certainly didn't know about it. And there was no sort of underlying resources in my organizations that said like, here, take these courses or here, let us help you. Right. And so there's a lot of onus on the leader. That's where even having a good network is so key, and something that I've definitely had to learn in my career is like, who are the people that can point you in the right direction, that you can call on, that have your back, that can explain stuff to you, and you can ask some really dumb questions, right? Like, I have a few of those mentors where I'm like, okay, I'm just going to ask you something that I'm pretty embarrassed to ask anywhere else, but I need to know. So, like, explain this to me, right? And so even having a network is crucial in this regard.
I love that, Andrea. I so resonate with this because, like, right now, I just got this new job to be the head of customer success for a big global company. And I come in thinking I'm gonna be there's gonna be lots of training and whatnot. And first day there's like company cultural training, blah blah blah, onboarding. But then after that, I'm completely on my own, and I have to really own this and come in with like a lot of confidence. Like I've got my shit together, I know exactly what to do, and thank God I do have my shit together. But it's so funny because I was telling myself the other day, if I don't know something, I'm just gonna call hater or somebody within like Rachel Proban or somebody within the network that I know for sure will have the answer. So I would 100% agree. Um, and Andrea, actually, I have a question for you. Going back into the sales acumen, when you were in the roles within these companies that you work at, um, hiring one of the traits that makes life easier as a customer success manager is, I would say, one would be is if you're a little bit like commercial, if you have a commercial mindset, it helps out a lot. But also the business acumen side of it. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to ask you, do you think business acumen is how do you test for that when you're looking for that sort of characteristic in hiring a team that has that skill set?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the short answer is I don't know how much business acumen you really need to have as a manager or as a director. It's great if you have some of that. I think you definitely need it as a VP, and you for sure need it if you're in the C-suite, right? And so there's a lot that I actually teach the managers and directors under me, and I'll teach them through data, right? And asking really good questions of like, okay, so we have a churn problem, let's just say, right? Well, how do we know that we have a churn problem? And how much revenue are we losing? What is that costing the business? If churn increased by 1% next quarter, how much additional revenue would we lose, right? I'm teaching business acumen by asking data driven questions about a problem, right? And so that's how you sort of upskill the leaders, and that's how you develop that sort of business acumen on the job, right? And so I'll be asking questions about that, or okay, well, if we decrease customer discounts by this, how much revenue would that be? How much additional revenue would we drive, right? Um, if we increase the price by 5%. How much revenue would that be? How much are the resources costing you on your team? So, what are all of the resource costs of the CSM team? So, salaries and compensation, bonuses, training, you name it. Like, what's the budget, right? How much does a CSM team cost to run? Okay, well, how much revenue are we bringing in that same period, right? So, if these are all your costs of the CSM team over a course of a year, which you could easily figure out, well, how much revenue did we drive, right? And that's your expansion revenue. And what is the ratio of that expansion revenue to your expenses? That's the net magic number that I was alluding to, is that ratio, right? So there are ways that you can build business acumen through data and through asking the right questions in a very natural way. And so that's what I try and do for my leaders, and even the questions I ask myself to build my own business acumen is like, well, what does this actually mean? What does this translate in terms of revenue and dollars and cents? I think as long as you're always asking sort of that question, then you'll naturally sort of start to dig into things, if you will.
Oof, I love this, Andrea. This is so great. This is amazing. And Andrea, with your when you worked at is it called Procore? That's how you say it, right? That company.
Mhm.
Okay, I know because they also have a location here in Dubai. So
Yes.
I kind of wanted to ask you, obviously because you've had experience working also in global markets, what are some of the trends you see in larger markets like the Americas that you think translate really well into a growth market like the Middle East?
This is a really good question. I mean, I think what's always interesting is and so I'm going to speak from my own personal experience here, right? So what I found really interesting is a company that's sort of grown up in the US, right? So US headquarters, US founders, maybe they started in the US market. So maybe they didn't start global, right? Some companies do, and certainly I can think of a number of companies that just start global out of the gate. But when they start in the US, um, the assumption is that, well, we'll just take what worked here and we will do it over there. Right? We'll do it regionally. We're going to do it in this other market. It worked here, so therefore it must work over there. Right? And that was my experience, certainly at Procore when they entered the Canadian market. They were very established in the US market, right? They had things that worked. And the assumption was, well, Canada and even Australia, because we had our Australian office at that time too, well, they're so similar to the US that this is going to work there, right? So I'm not even talking about the Middle East at this point. I'm talking about Canada. We're neighbors to the US. There's this assumption that, like, okay, we're going to take what we did in the US and it's going to work in Canada. Well, did it work? Not really. Right? Not really, because our buyers are different here. The culture is slightly different. Our risk tolerance is different here. It's a smaller population. So, referrals are more important here. Different rules, regulations, compliance is different here. And so even in that example of like, okay, well, US and Canada, they must be the same. Well, they're not. And Canada and Australia, they're not the same. And certainly, I can only imagine when you get into the Middle East, they're not the same, right? And so I think this is where, you know, um, this idea of like going global and international, yes, but there's always this regional nuance, and you need to be so sensitive to those things so that you don't sort of bulldoze your way into a market and fail, right?
Yeah, then.
So true. And it's funny when I was running one of the teams I was running back in the day was America, so South America, Canada, US, and it was exactly that same thing when we entered the Canadian market. And luckily, we had some Canadians that we put in there from that perspective, so they understood the market better. But it's a very different approach from the US, like in terms of the culture, and not to mention if you have, and we had an office in Montreal and Quebec, and there you have the French speaking population, and that's completely different than the other, the English part of Canada, and it's yeah, every part of it is very nuanced, and it's the same thing in the Middle East. I think when we have companies coming here, and Ivan made the move, I made the move as well. And you talk to people back home in the US and they're like, well, yeah, it's the Middle East, but every country is different. The UAE is very different from Saudi Arabia or from Egypt or from Qatar, whatever. It's like completely different markets. And it's the same thing in Europe and everywhere else. So I think that the nuance we miss a lot of times, especially as companies, because we kind of just think, let's just copy and paste. It works here, it'll work there. It's the same product, it's the same market, but it comes down to that the people aspect, the cultural piece of it, and everything around that that's really influential. But let me ask you this, Andrew, because this is obviously a topic that we kind of always have to cover in any of these conversations, and I'm sure in any of the podcasts and discussions that you go into, and that's AI, of course. What are your thoughts on kind of everything going on around AI and customer success right now? There's a ton, of course, when we talk about AI in terms of the Gen AI stuff that can help enable and make us a little bit more productive and efficient. Now there's a lot of things around AI agents and how they can slot into our organizations and do work and execute. But I'm kind of curious, like, what's your general thoughts on AI's impact, where we're headed, and then how are you advising leaders or organizations that you're consulting to think about AI right now?
This is a great question. Something I also get asked about a lot, as you can imagine. But I mean,
Yes.
I really think of AI right now as like a co pilot as opposed to the driver, right? And there are certainly things that we can create efficiencies, and those are great. But I'll give you a real example that I'm working on right now. For one of my clients, I have been listening to their customer calls. And so we train them on a brand new quarterly business review process, a brand new success plan process. And so, what I wanted to do is listen to those actual customer calls. I wanted to hear if it was landing. I wanted to know if the CSMs were sort of using the talk tracks that we gave them. I wanted to get a sense of the problems that we're solving for those customers and how it translates into a success plan and how we would measure that. Anyways, I wanted to dig pretty deep into all of this. And so I listened to, no joke, 100 calls. And so I listened to so many calls, onboarding calls and kickoff calls and renewal conversations and difficult conversations, technical conversations. Like I listened to a whole variety of calls across a team of about 6 CSMs. And after listening to a lot of calls, as you can imagine, I was like, "Ugh, maybe I could use, ChatGPT to help me analyze these calls." And right, which I knew, I've talked to other leaders who have done this, and I was like, I know that I can do this. So now that I've listened to all these calls, I know what I'm listening for. I know the kind of coaching output I want. Let me see if I can build this custom ChatGPT to do this. That would be amazing. Anyways, so I started it. I even used ChatGPT to help me write all the prompts. I was like, here's what I want to do. Help me write the prompts, right? When I analyze these calls, I want to look for this. I want this as the coaching sort of output. I gave it examples of good calls and not good calls. I gave it our cross-selling discovery questions that we would ask and an example of a success plan. And like I gave it all this stuff and I refined it a couple times and I was like, let's work on the prompt together. Let's make this better. Anyways, long story short, I started feeding the calls through the chat GPT, right? I would copy the transcript, feed it through and be like, what coaching do you have? And then what I would do, so I'd read the coaching and then I would listen to the call. And I would see like, okay, did the coaching match what I would have said now that I've listened to the whole call? So, short answer and spoiler alert, no, they did not match. It wasn't bad, but the chat GPT couldn't pick up on nuances in the conversation. The Gong transcripts that I was using, they had spelling mistakes in them. Like it's listening, right, and transcribing. So it's not perfect. Um, it really couldn't pick up on a lot of the nuances, the context of the conversation. And it kept spitting out like, oh, well, the CSM didn't develop a success plan at the end of the call. And I was like, well, I'm not looking for the success plan. I'm looking for metrics, right? Of like,
Yes.
how are we going to measure success, but not the plan. So I went back and I refined a few times. And I'm going to say right now, it's a great co pilot. I feed it the call, it generates the coaching, which is good. And then I go back and I listen to the call and I listen to those points and I decide if I agree or disagree. And I feed that back into ChatGPT and I tell ChatGPT so it can learn. But it's good. It's a good starting place for me. It's better than listening to calls over and over again, but it's a co-pilot. It is like if I just started feeding it calls without listening to them, the feedback, right, is not at a place where I'm comfortable with that. It will start spitting out bad advice and the CSMs will ignore it. So this is a very long-winded story of me telling
That
you
was
that
great.
like I see AI more as a co-pilot right now that needs constant refining as opposed to a replacement.
Mm,
No,
100%.
definitely. Yeah, I think that's a good story. And yeah, we need to set you up with a ref setter account. You can do that much easier. But that aside, what I was gonna say though, I think it's interesting because and so with Revster, obviously we have our AI platform and for building AI agents and doing these things. And we see these from across the board in terms of different departments, right? Whether that's finance, success, HR, sales, building for different use cases. But when we see the ones in customer success in particular, I feel a lot of it will be just what you mentioned, right? A leader that is proactive and thinking about this and thinking, okay, how can I try to leverage AI, whether that's as a co-pilot, as an additional help, or some substitute for parts of the process that they're running. But it's a lot of it is figuring it out by yourself still, right? It's trying to go through ChatGPT or Claude or some of the models that are more generalist models and try to kind of teach it CS a little bit in terms of what to look for and what to not look for. But a lot of leaders aren't even there yet. They're kind of sitting by the on the sidelines, waiting for, like you said before, in terms of like how we in CS, like trying to define who we are. We're also kind of waiting for someone to define how AI is going to shape what customer success will be down the line, right? And I think that's something that's really dangerous as a discipline, as if we're just kind of waiting for sales to figure out and marketing and all these other departments figure out how to leverage AI and then kind of say, all right, let's just copy paste this sales AI tactic into CS and now you guys got to kind of fit around this versus actually being proactive and develop ourselves how we can leverage AI across the CS, the workflow and process, because it will be there in the like whether we like it or not, it will be a big part of everything that we do. I think that's great to hear that you're proactively doing something, whereas I see a lot of other leaders are kind of just waiting for someone to tell them about this. But that must be a big challenge also, Andrea, when you come into organizations. Are you being asked more and more now with new jobs that you're getting and so on and so forth to also think about the AI piece, or is it still more so come in, solve my churn problem, or help us, with expansion revenue? Or are the questions also shifting towards like, okay, how can we transform leveraging AI? How can we be more efficient in our CS, reduce costs, or increase productivity? Has that shifted at all yet, or is it still kind of the proven requests that we'll get as CS consultant?
Yeah. I mean, so again, the companies that I talk to, like they have these big meaty problems, and it's the problem they bring me. And if I can layer in AI to help solve the problem, then that's okay. But they really just want to solve the problem,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
It's still like
so
solve this thing.
um,
Yeah.
exactly, right? And so, it's what I find really interesting is I've had my, consulting business for a few months now. And even though my ideal company sort of profile, my area of expertise is that 50 million to 150 million ARR, that's where my expertise is really deep and broad. I get asked, advice and for help with, companies that are sub 10 million all the way up to, billion-dollar companies, right? And what I find so interesting is the problems are kind of the same. They're nuanced, and of course, in an organization that's sub 10 million, they're in a different size and stage of growth and have different priorities. But like you'd be shocked, or at least I have been shocked at how similar they actually are. Billion-dollar company that has a legacy CRM, terrible data, and a very reactive CS organization, right? And then I talked to, a $4 million company where they're like, okay, well, how do we go sort of up market and not spread ourselves too thin? How would we measure that? And I mean, yes, they sound like different things, but they're not really that
Yeah.
different. Like I I think, for the longest time I thought, wow, billion-dollar company, they must have it figured out. Of course their CS organization is like a well-oiled machine. Of course it's proactive. Of course it's driving revenue, because how did you get to $1 billion if you weren't? But they do. They can get
Yes.
to $1 billion and have a very hodgepodge CS organization. So I'm always let me go back to your question, but it's always problem first in
Yes.
every company I talk to. and AI second. And I'm always shocked at how those problems can be so similar in
Yeah,
companies in vastly sort of different size and stages.
that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's yeah. It's and I've seen it myself as well, running, like I said, sub 10 million, 50 to 100, 150, and several hundred million or up to billion. Like it's very similar challenges in terms of, we have a churn problem, we have an expansion problem, we need to be more efficient. It's just at different levels, at different scopes in terms of the numbers and the machine behind it. But surprisingly often, yeah, you come into a $1 billion company and you think, oh, these guys should have it figured out. But they sometimes have less figured out than the small company where they're actually doing some stuff right from the beginning versus building up this depth of that data and other processes that haven't been good for a very long time. So just a very interesting observation indeed, and gives the little guys hope that they can still grow and become big. But if you figure it out earlier, it'll be much easier once you become big because that's much harder to change. I'd move that big oil tanker when it's $1 billion is much harder than the little small ship there when you're 10 or 20 or 50 million.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was just like thinking, I wanted to take your perspective on how do you think AI is gonna impact jobs in customer success, like headcount growth and beyond.
It's a really great question. I mean, and there's a lot sort of out there right now about how companies are not hiring sort of the more junior roles, or it's harder for new grads to find roles, or,
Yeah.
so I guess I do see it playing a role and impacting CS jobs. I mean, obviously, the more that we can automate, the less sort of human touch we need. But I don't see it as a replacement, right? Like I still see it as that co-pilot, if you will. So how much can we automate? How much efficiency can we create? But I don't ever see a world in which a customer wouldn't want to talk to a real human person. In fact, um, I think, more and more in this age of AI, we are so grateful to talk to a human, right? We're just like, wow, like it's amazing. If we can talk over Zoom, that's great. If we could talk face to face, that's like even better. So there's like the premium on talking to a human. And so, especially for those strategic enterprise accounts, I don't ever see that going away.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're still gonna need the human touch. And yeah, I think like just like your experience that you were having with ChatGPT feeding the transcripts and it wouldn't pick up on nuances or tones or energetics or like I don't think the emotional intelligence is gonna be at least not I'm hoping not anytime soon, but I don't think that emotional intelligence is going to be so easily be translated to a ChatGPT. So I agree with you on that. And Andrea, I wanted to also ask you. Of course, you've had many years of experience both in companies, now working for yourself. Is there a one piece of advice that somebody gave you in your career that has stuck with you that you keep on coming back to?
Yeah, there's two actually. One is that earlier in my career, one of my mentors told me that I would need to spend money on myself to advance in my career. And so this was when I was a director. And my first reaction at the time was, what do you mean? Like, I'm gonna need to like spend money. And she was like, yeah, like associations, courses, coaches, right? And my first reaction was like, well, wouldn't the company pay for that? Like, it aren't they gonna invest in me as an employee? And like she was very much like, no, like, you're going to have to take your own sort of career development in your own hands, which is going to cost you money. And she was absolutely right. I've hired coaches, taken certifications, memberships, you name it, right? Like I've 100% spent money on my own personal development. But she was normalizing that, and she was saying like, that's okay. And you're going to need to do that to advance. So that was the first thing. And then the second piece of advice I got early in my career um, was from someone who was not in my industry. She was completely different industry. And what she had said was, um, if you are 70% sure of a decision, then you need to make the decision. That is the decision. Um, and give yourself permission to pivot if it's the wrong decision. So if you're 70% sure, commit. And she said commit 110% to making it successful. But if new information comes up or you realize you're headed in the wrong direction, pivot, right? And so what she was really saying is don't get stuck in like analysis paralysis. You'll never have all of the information. 70% is good enough. Speed is more important. You commit 110% to making it successful. So put your energy there on the execution, and it's perfectly okay to just switch directions or pivot in the light of new information. That's okay. And the faster you do that, the better. And so I've made a number of decisions in my life this way where I just needed to make a decision now and had to take the information that I had. And if I was 70% sure, I was like, we move, we run with it. And if it's wrong, then we fix. And so those are the two pieces of advice. One, invest in yourself. Don't be afraid to spend money to propel yourself in your own career. And then two, 70% is good enough. Move. And then pivot if you need to.
I love that.
Yeah, those are great pieces of advice. It's on the first one, it's really like you're investing in your career development, and your employer can invest in your job development. Those are two different things. Unless you're sticking around the same place for 20 years, those are two different paths that you need to continue investing in. So I think people forget that sometimes and associate their development with just that job at that moment versus their career as a whole. So I think that's really great advice. And yeah, on the other piece, I tell the same thing leaders all the time. Your job is to make decisions. That's the job of a leader at a certain level at the company. It's really just to make decisions. That's what you're doing every day. It's making decisions. You need to make sure you're making more good ones than bad ones, and then typically you'll be good if you have net positive there. But you need to make decisions. That's what the job is all about. When you're maybe manager, director, or lower, it's about executing and operating. When you get to higher levels, you execute through your decisions. So I think that's a great piece of advice, to not be afraid to make decisions and do them fast versus having 100% information, because you never get 100% information. So that's great advice. I love that. Amazing, Andrea. So we're running through our conversation here today, and what we typically want to do here at the end of it is we do like a quick lightning round with our guests, where we'll throw out some quick questions and answers back from you. And yeah, we won't throw you anything too hard, but yeah, are you ready for that, Andrea? A little quick lightning round?
Let's
Yeah,
do
okay,
it.
amazing. Awesome. So we'll start with an easy one, which is right now, what's your favorite piece of content to consume? It could be a podcast, a book, something else.
Oh, my favorite piece of content. I mean, so I am really active on LinkedIn, and I do find some really good content there. What I like about LinkedIn is I can get some different perspectives, right? Especially if I follow people in different industries. The broader sort of my network is there. I do get different perspectives, which I really enjoy. So I am pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm always reading. I read Tiny Experiments recently, which I loved that book. Um, I'm reading The One right now, like The One Thing, which I'm also really enjoying. So, but yeah, I mean, I consume a lot of content on LinkedIn. I like how it's bite sized. I can follow different people. But then I definitely do some reading. The podcast I like is Diary of a CEO. I mean, that one just blows my mind every episode. I learn something that I never knew. Um, and the host there gets really deep into some really interesting topics.
Mm,
That's great.
so
Great.
good.
Yep, agreed. Awesome. Next one then for you, staying a similar track here, but any people or person that you like to take inspiration from, that you recommend leaders to follow?
This is a really interesting one because whenever I'm asked about this question, I always struggle because I view everyone as a normal person. And
Right.
so whenever I was asked earlier in my career and as a younger person, like, what celebrities do you aspire to? Like, who do you follow? Who do you gotta? I was always like, but they're all normal people. Like, I don't know, right? And so, I get brilliant advice from just really ordinary people, right? I talked to my neighbor the other day and had a brilliant conversation. So, of course, you can follow some influential people, but I would say you don't need to. Everyone has great advice and great perspective. So, I know I didn't really answer your question, but I
That's a
I
great
really
answer.
do.
Yeah.
I think everyone is just on the same playing field, and that's how I view
Yeah.
it.
I
That's
love that. Yeah.
that's so good. Instead of putting people in a pedestal, yeah.
Yeah, I've never followed celebrities. I've never had this, role model. Every sort of role model I've had have been really ordinary people.
So I will ask you the next question. Do you have a new favorite idea that you have recently learned about?
Mm. So I mentioned the book Tiny Experiments. I really appreciate this book, and what I appreciate most about it is that I think so often, at least in my own career, I've chased goals and I've had these goals that like then I work backwards and I'm trying to get to. Whereas I find myself very much in this place in my life where it's not so much about a lofty goal. In fact, I don't really know what that end goal is right now. It's more about what experiments can I run? What sort of mini risks can I take? And if it goes well and it's positive, I'm going to do more of that. And if it doesn't go well, I'm going to do less of it. And I'm not aspiring to a goal as much as I'm aspiring to continuing to push myself and take micro risks, if that makes any sense.
Wow, that's so amazing. Now you piqued my interest. I want to read the book. That completely makes sense, Andrea, because like the way that you just said it right now, it released like the pressure to the
Mhm.
outcome, which is what I think, and having big goals kind of like puts that pressure on you. And by the way, I've always just heard that when you're like in your 40s, like life apparently doesn't really take off until like your 40s, because from the time you're born all the way up to there is just a bunch of experimented. I think it was Carl Jung who said that. So I really like the whole concept about experimenting.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I would agree with that. I wrote a recent post about exactly that, about like being in your 40s and just knowing who you are and being willing to take those risks. But also about that energy and that flow and whatever sort of brings you that positive energy aligns with your purpose. You want to do more of that. So I definitely think like something shifts in your 40s. And I do love that. I love this approach of taking these sort of micro experiments and not chasing such like a lofty goal. In fact, I don't know what goal I'm chasing exactly right now. I just know that I'm going to try this little thing or I'm going to try that other little thing and see where it goes.
Oh, I love that. And that, what is one life philosophy that you like to live by?
Oh, a life philosophy. Oh, that's a deep one. Life philosophy. I mean, this is going to sound like a funny one, but one of the philosophies I have is that's not my problem. Which is like,
It's pretty good, pretty good.
it's just like I think sometimes we get, sidetracked or involved in things that are really not our problem. And so, you know, I have 3 kids and so it all started when my kids were really small. They're still small, but when they're, babies small and, someone's trash can would be rolling down the street, right? Because it's windy, but I have my 3 kids in tow And I'd be like, you know what, Andrea, like, I know you want to chase the trash can and put it on the side, but that's not your problem. Because you can't leave your 3 kids here on the sidewalk, and so that's where my mantra came from is when my kids were really small, I was like, Everything can't be my problem, so these ones are not mine."
Oh, wow, that's so good. I feel like being a mother can teach you the best life philosophies and the best ways of living. And honestly, that also makes me think about having really good boundaries. Like thinking that's not my problem is kind of like protecting your energetic space to what is the capacity that you can actually take on. I love that. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's also applicable for work. At sometimes, I feel like customer success, they throw everything at you. At some point, you have to delegate it back to somebody else, kind of. So it translates here. And Andrea, we are coming on to the very end of the podcast. Of course, we're gonna link your LinkedIn onto the description of the podcast. But if anybody wants to get in contact with you, what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn really is the best way. You can DM me directly. I'm very responsive. So, yeah, you can reach out there. You can email me. It's andrea.bumstead@csimpact.ca. That's the other way. But LinkedIn is where I live most of the time.
Okay, beautiful. And it's been such a lovely time talking to you and getting to know more about your background. Thank you so much for giving us your space and your heart and for showing up to the podcast. There was so many pieces of information that I made little notes on, and I'm sure our guests or our visitors are going to love it.
Thank
You're
you,
very
Andrea.
welcome. Thank
It's
you
been
for
such a
having
pleasure.
me.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
We want to thank our sponsors for supporting the Success Revenue podcast. RevSetter is the #1 customer success and management platform in the Middle East region, offering global capabilities mixed with regional solutions that helps your CS, account management, and go-to-market teams 10x efficiency, improve customer experience, and turbocharge customer retention rates.
And thank you to Medlify, a leading marketplace. Workers and employers in the healthcare space needs and demands meet, with benefits from both sides. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.